Good evening, everybody. You're all very welcome to the community hall here in Mulvaney for another of our Heritage Week events. Before we begin, just a couple of matters, housekeeping matters. I'll ask you please to make sure that your mobile phones are switched off, not on silent. Look at them all, race to the pockets, stay away. In the unlikely event of an emergency, which I don't foresee, please make yourselves familiar with the exit. There's one behind you on the left, one here on my right, one behind you if things get extremely bad, one out the back to the kitchen if you're really in a bad way.
If you need to leave early.
Joe, you're very welcome. We're delighted to have you here tonight, Joe.
Thank you, Anthony.
And we thank you for coming to do this. It's a fascinating story, and we're very fortunate to have you here. Our speaker tonight is Joe McKenna, who will take us through Mulvaney's life, his art, his extraordinary American career, and importantly, his connection with this place in which we are all connected. There will be an opportunity for questions afterwards, so sit back and enjoy. And I'll go back when I have questions.
And Paul would answer them all.
Yeah.
You're well able. Best of luck.
Thank you very much. So firstly, thank you all for coming. Tonight we're addressing John Mulvaney, an artist and a patriot. But before we start, I'd like to pay our respects to the late Father Val Farrell and our sympathies to his family. Father Val sadly passed away in the past week. Father Val, through his photography and his iconic 1984 book on Mulvaney, has inspired many of us to reflect positively on our parish and community. It certainly did for me and our later committee who produced the Millennium Record in 2000. In the introduction to that book, I wrote that any place is really about its people. Father Val certainly enriched Mulvaney's heritage, and he was proudly of Mulvaney, despite his long absence from home. Tonight we are here to recall another of our people, one who against all the odds made a huge mark during his lifetime, displayed immense talent and left a lasting legacy through his art. John's story would be unbelievable if you saw it in a movie or a book, yet fact can be more astonishing than fiction. I first saw a mention of John Mulvaney around Christmas last year, totally by chance in a Facebook historical piece that randomly appeared on my phone. My eyes popped when I saw reference to Mulvaney and then Derala, and I was totally amazed and captivated. I sat back in wonder, reflecting on the life and times of this great man whom I had never heard of. When we produced the book in 2000, called Mulvaney Parish, the Millennium Record, it was a photographic record of the people of Mulvaney, but we also tried to unearth information from the townlands and a miscellany of historical pieces. Sadly, nowhere was there mention of John Mulvaney, neither was he mentioned in Father Val's book, and not so much to one side. I forwarded the online piece on John Mulvaney to my cousin in Kells, author and presenter Miles Dungan of the RT Radio History Show, and suggested he write about him, especially as he had previously written an amazing book on American history entitled How the Irish Won the West, and also the local historical novel Four Killings, based on family history and many other books. Miles did not come across our man John Mulvaney, but was familiar with his famous painting. Miles countered and challenged me to pull together a presentation for last year's 2025 Hinterland Festival in Kells, which I duly did. It turned out to be a labour of love as John Mulvaney's story unfolded. I hope you enjoyed the talk, but as you listen, please reflect on where he and indeed his brothers came from, his life's journey, the tragic times he survived yet prospered in, due to his determination and innate talents, the unbelievable historical events he witnessed and was part of, the challenges, the strife, the beauty of his work and the realism of battles he painted, his patriotism and finally betrayal and despair. His legacy lives on in his work, and I am confident that some commemoration will be made in his native parish to remember this incredible man. This is John Mulvaney's story, based largely on a biography written by Thomas P. Chute in 1909 and on the forensic research carried out by John's grandniece, Anne Webber, who spent 40 years at the task. There was a volume of other sources, many secondary, which are listed at the end of this piece. Still, in different publications and articles, contradictions do exist. I tried to stay as loyal as possible to Anne Webber's work. I owe everything to the extended Mulvaney family members for sharing so much information. I am sure even more information may exist locally, and we would warmly welcome any gems of information. Be assured that it will be treated most respectfully as we endeavour to better know this great man and his works. John Mulvaney was born in Durralla, Minalty in 1839 to Francis, Fanny Lee and Thomas Mulvaney, tenant farmers on 16 acres of land. The Mulvaney homestead, which we see here, is a fine structure now derelict, and it's accessed by a 1 kilometre lane via the townland of Fia off the Minalty-Bailieborough Road. The last occupant was Ellie O'Brien, who lived there until her passing in 1977. John's father Thomas would have been involved in political activism during the Tide Wars of 1829 to 1832. He was actually charged with attacking a man with a scythe, but the case was dropped, however, when it came to trial because the alleged victim had a gun. Thomas later recorded with others as having an unregistered weapon in Fia in 1841. John was one of 4 brothers, all destined in time to emigrate to America. James was born in 1835, John in 1839, Thomas in 1842, and Peter in 1843. John's early childhood would have witnessed the worst years of the Great Famine, including the loss of his father, Thomas Mulvaney Sr., who died in 1844. He was one of many who sadly died or left as the population of the townland of Durralla declined from 169 in 1841 to 67 in 1851, a 60% drop. It did appear worse in the Newcastle end of the parish, as overall in Minalty, according to Father Val's book, the overall reduction was 40%, from 6,453 in 1841 to 3,894 in 1851. John's mother Fanny went on to have a long life, only passing away in 1883. We see here, just on the map, you can see, I'm going to be mentioning, well, we see Durralla up there at the top, we see Minalty, and we're going to hear mention of a place called Mountainstown. The Protestant landlord in Durralla at the time was Arthur Cornwallis Pollock, descended from linen traders at Newry. His father John, a lawyer, had held several high political positions and was a close friend and investor for the Marquess of Downshire, one of the largest landowners in Ireland. Together they took a strong stance against United Irishmen, including paying informers. They were responsible for the arrest, for example, of the leaders Thomas Russell and Samuel Nielsen in 1796. In 1809 he is recorded as warning Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington, then British Prime Minister, against the dangers of Catholic emancipation. However, in 1816 he himself was accused of fraud and thereafter shunned by society. He died in 1825. His son Arthur, in contrast, travelled Europe and Russia as a young man and settled for the life of a country gentleman at his home in Mountainstown at Castletown in Navan. He served as High Sheriff of Meath in 1809 and died in 1846. He was a founder member of the Meath Hunt. Right, let's go back. We'll get the hang of this. That's just an idea there of the lands they held above the townlands of Durralla, Tulliattan, Tullyairn, Drumnever, Curbuggy and Drumiskin. So Pollock holdings were largely centred there in Minalty. And then there's Mountainstown House, the residence just outside Castletown of Wilkinstown now, about 12 kilometres from Kells. It may be noteworthy that they were not listed with other local landlords who held a general meeting of the people of Mulvaney Parish about the state of the potato crop in 1845 as the potato blight spread. Arthur was succeeded by his son John Osborne George Pollock, Justice of the Peace and Deputy Lieutenant of Meath. He served as High Sheriff for the county in 1854. John Mulvaney's upbringing and harsh experience in youth certainly influenced his political leanings later in life. His friend Thomas P. Chute, originally from Oldcastle, we believe, stated in 1909 that Master Patrick Rogers of Comeen National School, a Clare man, while he travelled within Ireland, held strong nationalist views. The following is an extract from the Gorey Gallery booklet of 2010 for the sale of one of his most famous works, The Battle of Aughrim, and it explains: Mulvaney was of an imaginative and inquiring mind, his teacher's favourite. They both loved Ireland and hated the Sassenach. Master Rogers travelled the country searching for monuments and traditions redolent of Ireland's past. Indeed, according to Thomas Chute, Mulvaney's erstwhile biographer, the repeated beating back of the combined English, Dutch and Danish cavalry at the pass of Uckery by the magnificent Irish horsemen under Sanruth was a theme upon which Master Rogers grew eloquent, erudite, passionate and zealous. His teacher held forth as Owen Roe, Neil, Father Murphy and the Emmets. This was published in the Gaelic American of 6th of March 1909. All of this Mulvaney took with him to America. It's just of interest that Master Rogers was actually an ancestor of Larry O'Brien from Killeator and Super Value in Kells. Just as an aside, we took a look at John Mulvaney's situation. Above is the family tree prepared by the late Mrs. Angela Duffy, née Mulvaney, Rathbone. Angela left another family tree going back further on the McKenna side, which showed my great-great-great-grand aunt, Anne McKenna, married Matthew Mulvaney on the 20th of May, 1780. This would be John's great-grandfather. If this is true, then there is a family connection. Sure, paper won't refuse ink, so it's a possibility. Not proven, but I'm happy to go with it. Back to John's story. His mother Fanny remarried to a neighbour's widower, Owen O'Brien, on the 13th of April 1845. He brought 2 sons and 2 daughters to the marriage. Fanny and Owen went on to have at least 4 other children. Alice, Ali, born in 1848, who we'll meet later in New York, Pat 1851, Lawrence 1846 and Mary 1855. In 1851, with desperation in their hearts and a true sense of adventure, John, aged 12, and his older brother James, aged 17, scraped whatever savings they could and headed off for Dublin to find passage for America. They weren't as fortunate as their brothers Thomas and Peter, as Owen O'Brien was able to sell a horse for £40 to fund their later exit to the dream that was America. The 2 youngsters could not book passage on a ship to America alone, so they had to find another way. On the docks, John and James got separated. Undaunted, John, seeing a large family preparing to board, got on the ship by blending in with them. The mother took pity on him and allowed him to pretend to be a family member for the trip. When the ship landed in New York's East River docks, John was on his own. Little did he know that he was arriving in America at a tumultuous time in its history. Firstly, the indigenous American tribes were being driven from their lands. Successive administrations had broken treaties, destroyed their livelihoods and culture, and were killing and driving them into reservations. This was to enable arriving settlers to obtain land and go west to follow their dreams, having left, as was the case of the Mulvaneys and others from minority, poverty and death at home. Then there was the inevitability of the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865, which John Mulvaney would encounter firsthand, and his own brother Thomas would fight him. In 1850, America was a very different nation to what we know today. Less than half the land area was in the United States. There was a large area called unorganized territory by the whites, where the remaining Indian nations existed. The very term unorganized highlights the ultimate goal of the US government. The state of Iowa was then the farthest west from New York by land. So you can see the United States was only that green part when John arrived. The states were divided economically and in relation to the issue of slavery. The following map indicates the split between North, which was the Union, and South Confederates, which would lead to the Civil War in 1861. So again, the green states were the Union and the yellow states were the Confederates who supported slavery. And that was largely the breakdown of the Civil War in America. However, by 1865, mainland USA was more or less politically formed as we know it today. Marked on the map are some of the cities that Mulvaney visited during his life. And Montana, up there, where the Battle of the Little Big Horn was to happen. It's just amazing when you look at the map and you think of, you know, only a couple of years earlier, like it was all wilderness and wild and, you know, no proper transportation routes, etc. So to have travelled the width and breadth of the continent at that time was just an amazing achievement. If today we live in a time when the US President says, "Make America great again," then this was the time of Make America Great. John was probably oblivious to much of this when he arrived in America. He did have his wits about him though, as he had made contacts on the Atlantic crossing and he had already arranged a job working on the Lake Erie Canal in New York State. After a short stop in New York City, he was soon working hard at his job in the canal. When James arrived, he made his way to Iowa, where others from Minority had gone. John's job at Lake Erie was as a towboy. He worked and walked the mules, who pulled the barges from Albany to Buffalo, a distance of 302 miles, doing 4 or 5 trips every summer for the next 5 years. This would have allowed him to settle in and save some money as well. During the winters, when the canal was frozen, Mulvaney would spend some time in New York. There he would get some odd jobs, obtain some more formal schooling, and he also began to visit the Dusseldorf Gallery, which must have been like a treasure trove of beautiful art to him in such sumptuous surroundings. Mulvaney knew it was time to get serious about pursuing his art, so he left his job at the canal. He got a job as a messenger, cleaner, and even as a model at the New York Academy of Design. Professor Wadesworth took John under his wing, having encouraged him to seek a scholarship to the school. He enrolled as a student. It was 1859, and he was now actively engaged in his lifelong dream of being an artist. Here's an early artwork that was accepted as an exhibit during his time in the New York Academy of Design in 1860. Very different to the type of paintings for which he would later become famous. While there, Mulvaney would have seen and been influenced by his first large-scale historical painting, Washington crossing the Delaware by Emanuel Lutz, which was 21 feet by 12 feet, when he later painted his most famous masterpiece. Mulvaney also became a talented colourist, colorising black and white drawings. One newspaper called him a phenomenon. It was a well-paid skill by the period's newspapers and weekly magazines. His work became so well known that in 1861 he got a lucrative offer to move to Chicago and work for Irish papers in the city. There he connected with the powerful Irish nationalist movement in Chicago. Many would be members of the Fenians and then later Clan Gael. That connection would last throughout his life. It is likely that he attended the First Fenian Brotherhood Conference of 1863 in Philadelphia, and certainly did attend the second in Cincinnati in 1865. Just to put this better in context, the Fenian Brotherhood were very active, and they undertook a number of failed armed incursions into Canada in 1866 and again in 1870 and 1871. The objective was to bring pressure on the British government, who ruled Canada, to withdraw from Ireland. The American Civil War 1861 to 1865 was the first US war that reporters and artists were heavily involved in covering. Mulvaney got a job with newspaperman Matthew Brady and Alexander Gardner during this time. Brady sent him to his studio in Washington until 1865. You're a fine looking man there, all right? While there he painted the following landscapes. Note the contrasts in the styles adapted. Being based in Washington, Mulvaney became acquainted with many famous commanders of the war, including Irish Americans Phil Sheridan, born in Albany, New York, and parents from Kilncare, County Cavan, John Logan, Thomas Francis Marr, and Chicagoan James Mulligan. He met George Custer as well, with whom he would later be so strongly connected. Seeing war up close, Mulvaney was filled with thoughts of the great battles of Irish history and how few had been depicted in art. He returned to Chicago after the war, thinking of being the first artist to do that. The Irish American Club in St. Louis had a programme to aid young Irish people with potential. Through this, Samuel B. Coles from St. Louis recognised his talent. He funded a trip to Europe for him in 1869. John first studied briefly in Paris before being accepted into the Premier Art Academy in Munich, Germany, under Karl von Piloty. In 1871, he won the Academy's Medal of Honour. Then he went on to study in Antwerp, Paris and Amsterdam. Mulvaney stopped off on for a trip to Ireland. He travelled widely, visiting many places he had learned of from Master Rogers. He made many drawings, studies and detailed notes, planning an exhibition of Irish historical paintings and landscapes which he would complete on his return to America. Thomas Tude recalls Mulvaney's great disappointment when he was refused permission to sketch the high crosses in Kells churchyard. His response was that he would paint a picture of hell, placing this person in it, appealing for just one cooling touch of a Celtic cross on his heated brow. Mulvaney returned to Chicago in 1871 with his collection of materials for a series of planned paintings, including the Siege of Athlone, the Battle of Benburb, the women defending the walls of Limerick, and O'Neill's Challenge. He set up a studio, but his timing could not have been more unfortunate. In October, the Great Chicago Fire consumed his studio and all his possessions, including his Irish works. Devastated, this prompted him to move west for several years. Having checked in with Mr. Coates, his patron, he then went to visit his three brothers in Eldon, Iowa. Peter had become a successful businessman and town treasurer. James was farming then, later turning to mining. And Thomas, the teetotaler, and his wife Annie had opened a very successful, if somewhat notorious, saloon in the Prohibitionist town. In 1873, while drinking whiskey in Thomas's saloon in Eldon, he heard of a trial taking place in the town. He went to see what was going on. This was the trial of Joe Hickman, the man is standing, also known as Gorilla Joe. He was a notorious horse thief, and also it was alleged that he had participated in guerrilla warfare and house burnings along the Kansas-Missouri border during the Civil War. Now this is truly the stuff of Louis L'Amour novels, of the old black and white Western movies. Mulvaney attended the trial and he used friends and relatives as models for the picture, a practice we will also see later, including many fellow emigrants from County Meath. This is according to a recent piece written by John Moore and auctioneers for a sale in 2026. In 1876, Mulvaney got his first national recognition for the painting, Preliminary Trial of a Horse Thief, seen in a Western Justice's Court. He received much acclaim. He entered it in the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia. And it sold for $5,250. Over the next few years, he painted many pictures of the Wild West, gaining great recognition. And here's some of the pictures that he painted at the time. See there, you can see Red Cloud. He fought at the Battle of the Little Big Horn, and he was a fierce warrior and a leader of the Sioux. It was actually said at the time that, as we see later, one of Custer's brothers was killed and he was supposed to have eaten his heart. He also made money painting portraits of some very well-known Western figures. While Mulvaney was doing these paintings, General Custer and 210 members of the 7th Cavalry under his direct command were wiped out in June 1876 at the Battle of the Little Big Horn in Montana by a force of over 2,000 native Lakota Sioux and Cheyenne warriors, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse. Custer had attacked the sleeping Indian camp, believing intelligence reports that there were 800 warriors. Custer had divided his regiment to surround the attack and attack the Indian camp, preventing them escaping, stating, "There's enough for all of us, lads." The strategy failed, as they were unable to support each other in the face of a larger force. The native Indian forces lost 50 warriors in the battle that lasted 2 hours. 32 of the dead were Irish born, according to Miles Dungan in his book, and considerably more of Irish parentage. There were 15 Irish sergeants and 3 Irish corporals in Custer's command, as well as former mercenary and Civil War veteran Captain Miles Keogh of County Carlow, who was left unmutilated by the Indians, most likely as he was wearing an impressive medal awarded to him by Pope Pius IX for his service in the Papal Army. It would have resembled pendants the native Indians wore to ward off evil spirits. Sioux reports afterwards said that he died the bravest death and was the last blue coat to fall. This was the first American report of the battle. Note there were inaccuracies. There were actually no survivors. Custer, then aged only 36, also lost a number of family members. 2 younger brothers, Captain Thomas Custer, aged 31, a double recipient of the Medal of Honor, and Boston Custer, a civilian forage master, aged 27. His brother-in-law, First Lieutenant James Calhoun, who was 30, and his nephew, Henry Reed, a civilian herder, aged 18. Just bear with me. Custer had a great grow for the Irish, as in addition to the number of Irish in his unit, he had famously adopted the Irish tune Gary Owen as the regiment song. That was it. His trademark buckskin jacket was sewn by the regiment's tailor, Sergeant Jeremiah Finley, Tipperary. That's his jacket there on the right. And there's the headstones of the battlefield. News of the disaster caused sensation around the country, an outrage among the white Americans, who sought and got brutal retaliation against the native Indians, leading to their ultimate defeat and humiliation. Mulvaney later recalled, "I had once realised that this was the greatest subject for a battle picture known to American history. I had been seeking for a subject that would be fresh in the minds." Mulvaney, our man from Menotti, visited the battlefield in Montana twice to understand the terrain and observed cavalrymen and Native Americans in nearby Fort Leavenworth and on the Sioux reservations. He hired translators to gather accounts of the battle from the Sioux and Cheyenne. It is said that he visited Sitting Bull in Canada so that his painting could capture every minute detail of the battle and its combatants. Mulvaney painted this massive canvas measuring 20 feet by 11 feet of the battle in Kansas City, Missouri, completing it in 1881. It took him 2 years to complete the task. So you'll see two different versions of this painting. You'll see here that Custer has a sabre in one hand, and his hair is quite long, and he's actually quite tall. So that was the one that was used for copyright purposes. And this is the final painting here. A Missouri publication stated that he left a debt of $450 for unpaid room and board at the St. James Hotel in Kansas City. However, he did leave behind two paintings, The Old Professor and Love's Mirror, which were sold the following year by the sheriff for $450, covering the bill. Note, both paintings are now unlocated. He travelled east to exhibit the work, going first to New York, then to Boston, where he made slight alterations. He reduced Custer's size, replacing the left-hand sabre with a handgun and shortening his hair, as Custer had recently had a haircut. Throngs of excited admirers came to view the painting. Back then, paintings and drawings were the only way people had to see a battle. Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, said of the painting, "Nothing in the books like it, nothing in Homer, nothing in Shakespeare, more grim and sublime than either, all native, all our own, and all a fact." It is said that when Custer's widow, Libby, saw the image, she swooned. She would make it her life's work to lionize her husband in American history. Mulvaney and two Irish journalist friends, Dubliner James O'Kelly and Mayo man John Finnerty, made much to absolve Custer of responsibility for the defeat at the Little Big Horn, blaming others for leaving him stranded, thereby casting General George Armstrong Custer as the heroic figure in the public eye. The painting would travel around the country for 17 years, with and without Mulvaney. When he was there, Mulvaney would be feted as a celebrity, sometimes with receptions complete with a band. The charge was 25 cents for adults and half for children. In San Francisco, we're told that they also had Sioux Indians performing the ghost dance. This would have been controversial, as in 1890 the dance was banned on Lakota Sioux reservations by the US government. The painting was also exhibited at the 1893 World Fair in Chicago, celebrating 400 years since Christopher Columbus' discovery of America. It's said that he used his friend, the legendary General Philip Sheridan's image, regarded as one of the country's greatest generals in the painting, fighting at Custer's side. General Sheridan, 1831 to 1888, whose parents hailed from Killincare, County Cavan, just down the road from Mulvaney. It's said that he may have been born on board a ship to America, but to gain access to West Point, he had to claim birth in the USA. In Albany, New York, amazingly, where Mulvaney had worked on the canals when he arrived. Sheridan is the only military man to appear on a $10 banknote and one of only 53 persons, including presidents, to appear on any US dollar currency bill. It was issued in 1890 and 1891. In 1883, Mulvaney returned to Ireland to begin work on a series of patriotic Irish paintings under the patronage of Clonagale in Chicago. However, storm clouds were forming there. The organisation was about to undergo a bitter dispute between Alexander O'Sullivan, a Chicago lawyer, and Clonagale leader in Chicago, and his former friend Dr. Patrick Cronin. Clonagale's links to shady things and liquor dealers was also under scrutiny. Mulvaney was close friends with Cronin, which would also prove a problem. In Ireland, Mulvaney began work on the Battle of Aughrim, which was fought in County Galway. The bloodiest battle ever fought on Irish soil, where William's forces defeated the largely Catholic Jacobite army in 1691, with the loss of over 7,000 lives. The Jacobites, it said, had the upper hand until their French commander, Saint-Rue, was decapitated by a cannonball, just as he believed the battle could be won. Despite gallant efforts, without him the battle was lost. This followed the Battle of the Boyne and signalled the end of the dream of Catholic governance in Ireland. At this time, the clan was supporting the so-called dynamite campaign against Great Britain. In January 1885, Mulvaney travelled to London to research and sketch uniforms and weapons that were used in the battle at the Tower of London. While there, he was treated with suspicion due to his known political leanings. As it happened, he was secretly warned to leave immediately, and a series of bombs went off at the tower a couple of days later. He was sure that had he not left, he would have ended up in a British jail. He fled to France, where he completed the painting later that year. He was concerned as he knew he was under surveillance in Paris by the British authorities. He also knew he had to face up to this. He secretly sent some artwork to America and then brought the paintings to Dublin in July. The authorities could not fault it, for after all it was a painting of a famous British victory. The painting created an instant sensation, especially in the nationalist community. The founder of the Irish National Land League, Michael Davitt, later wrote to Mulvaney saying, "You deserve the thanks of the entire Irish nation. For in it you have not only upheld the artistic reputation of Ireland, but your genius has transferred to the canvas the dauntless bravery of those who died their land to save on Aughrim slope." He also praised Mulvaney for teaching subsequent generations the great lesson of a nation's march to freedom, which your brush now most eloquently enforces. Thomas Tuite, his biographer, points out that at this time Mulvaney was at the peak of his powers, alert and active, full of hopes and ideals, a wonderful conversationalist, charming and handsome, a genial companion, eloquent, equally fluent in several languages. It was a privilege and a pleasure to spend time with him. He also had a deep knowledge of poetry and philosophical sayings and of history and current affairs. However, when Mulvaney returned to Chicago in 1886, the problems between Alexander O'Sullivan and Dr. Patrick Cronin had exploded. Cronin had accused O'Sullivan of stealing $100,000, today approximately $3.5 million, from a fund collected by the families of those killed or jailed during the dynamite campaign. Cronin shared this evidence of O'Sullivan's activities with Thomas Tuite, who reported all to John Devoy in Ireland. Cronin in turn was accused of treason by O'Sullivan and was ordered an internal clan trial to try him. There were 3 jurors from each side. Notably, among O'Sullivan's side was an associate, Daniel Coughlin, a leading Chicago detective, and a Frenchman, Henry Le Caron, who later transpired to be a British spy of 25 years named Thomas Beach. He had been responsible for the arrest of many of the clan, including those on bombing missions in Britain. This came to light when he gave personal testimony against none other than Charles Stewart Parnell in London in a parliamentary commission hearing based on stories planted by him in the British newspapers. Alexander O'Sullivan and 2 others were found not guilty, and Cronin was expelled from the clan. Beach, the actual spy, further sowed the seeds of distrust and disharmony in the clan by intimating that there were other spies in the clan, so suspicion was immediately cast on Cronin. Dr. Cronin was brutally assassinated in Chicago in 1889. It was openly known who was responsible for the murder. 3 men were convicted of the murder in 1890. Among them was the same Chicago detective Daniel Coughlin, Alexander O'Sullivan's crony. Alexander O'Sullivan, however, was not charged. In a retrial in 1893, Coughlin was cleared of all charges amid rumours of a bribed jury. The other 2 had already died in jail in 1892 of tuberculosis. The murder and the trial caused a major rift in the organisation. Gillian O'Brien of Liverpool University writes that Clan na Gael slowly unravelled and as unedifying details of the inner workings of an idealistic but corrupt movement were exposed to public scrutiny. Meanwhile, Mulvaney's world started to fall apart. Innocent, John Mulvaney was seen as a Cronin man by O'Sullivan and his supporters. He was not to be trusted. As a result, all financial support from Clan na Gael dried up. His commission for the Battle of Aughrim fell through. However, Mulvaney, to his credit, did not forsake his friend. Mulvaney commemorated Cronin in a life-size portrait, which was presented to the Manchester Martyrs commemoration in Chicago later that year. With no patronage from the clan, he was dazed. His dreams of a series of works in Irish history was put aside, never to be taken up again. He could not find buyers for his works, and ended up in serious debt. His faith in human nature shattered. He was disappointed at every turn. He would move around to various cities around the country, visiting his brother Peter in Salido in Colorado. He went to Utah and painted Brigham Young's portrait. Please allow me to deviate again just for a moment, as I find this unbelievable. Young, 1801 to 1877, was the second leader of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, perhaps better known as the Mormon Church. The Mormon religion was not very popular, to put it mildly, in Missouri, where they were originally founded, and the governor issued the Mormon Extermination Order. Young led the church followers to Illinois. He was then the commander in the Illinois Mormon War after the assassination of Joseph Smith, the church founder, during his US presidential election campaign. Young succeeded Smith as church leader and led his followers from Illinois to Salt Lake Valley, Utah, via the Mormon Trail, founding Salt Lake City, where the church is still based. He was also responsible for establishing 350 towns, ensuring the colonization of that vast arid territory. He became the first governor of Utah Territory in 1850, starting the Utah War, when he was replaced as governor in 1858 by the then US President James Buchanan. This was a bloody affair with several mass murders of immigrant wagon trains committed at Young's command. The war ended when Young surrendered in exchange for a full pardon for the Mormon settlers. At his death, he had a current wealth estimated at $18 million, 56 wives, and in 2016 it's believed he had 30,000 direct descendants. He died of a ruptured appendix. Mulvaney travelled to many cities across America, often leaving suddenly and owing money as he went. Along the way, he painted a portrait of the former commander of the Irish Brigade, General Thomas Francis Marr, then acting governor of the Montana Territory. Mulvaney opened over 20 studios around the country in his life, continuously painting, such as Black Jack Logan's rallying charge at the Battle of Atlanta, which was commissioned while he was visiting his brothers in Colorado. However, the New York Times later in 1906 stated that he sold his paintings for trifling sums. Somewhere in his western travels, Mulvaney married Ellen Welsh in 1890, but they were divorced 2 years later in Colorado. We know very little of this romantic relationship, or that other romantic relationship with Lucy Deere, the grandniece of John Deere, the tractor man. Lucy was 22 years old, or 22 years his junior, but he was very much in love with her. She was also an artist and had worked as a servant and courthouse records researcher when John got to know her. On the artistic front, John continued his portrait work, many in private ownership today. This one here, it was actually purchased once because somebody thought it was that of Jesse James, but it wasn't. He created at least 3 Civil War battle works which were well received: Sheridan's Ride at Winchester, Macpherson's, and The Revenge and the Battle of Shiloh. However, his business acumen deserted him. He was robbed of his interest in Sheridan's Ride. All of these works are unlocated today, also most likely in private ownership. John Mulvaney's brother Thomas passed away in 1894 in Eldon, Iowa. Thomas had served in the Union Army and fought in 8 listed major battles, including Yorktown and Fredericksburg. A non-drinker, he opened a saloon in Eldon, Iowa. He was known as Stormy Jordan of Eldon. On his death, the local paper, strongly favouring prohibition, described Thomas as a notorious saloon keeper and a tumwa who operated an establishment known as the Road to Hell. The paper went on, "This frees Eldon of her persistent violators of the prohibitionary law." He became very wealthy but spent most of his fortune fighting prohibition. In Thomas's death notice, potential saloon keepers were told to take warning. His widow, Mrs. Annie Mulvaney, née O'Connor, did not heed the warning and continued operating in Eldon for many years, passing away in 1917. The establishment is still in business today under new management. On his death, Thomas left 2 sons, Joseph and George, and daughter Elizabeth. In 1897, Mulvaney moved to Brooklyn, New York, where his half-sister, Allie Muldoon, née O'Brien, lived, as he was having some health issues. He set up a studio nearby and continued to paint, but also began drinking heavily. Poignantly, he had lost his sweetheart Lucy Deere. They had been in contact around that time again. An Oklahoma newspaper carried an article later in 1921 commenting on their relationship. A shadow came between the artist and his sweetheart, a shadow that drove him east again and so clouded his life that in spite of fame and financial success, John Mulvaney saw no lifting of the shadow except in death. Perhaps a part explanation for what was to come. According to her obituary in 1946, when she died in Sacramento, 40 years ago, she was in the headlines when John Mulvaney, painter of Custer's Last Rally, committed suicide in New York, purportedly over his failure to win her love. That's her headstone there, and 2 of her paintings. John's brother Peter, 1843 to 1899, who he had always relied upon over the years, passed away in 1899 in Salido, Colorado, the town that he had founded. Imagine that. A man from Minalti founded a town in Colorado. Peter had started off as a railroad contractor, progressing in the railroad business. He located in Eldon, Iowa, and set up a mercantile business and was involved in town affairs. Doing well financially, he had a major setback when a fire destroyed his and other business in Eldon. He had no insurance, so he had to go back to railroading. He superintended the construction of the Santa Fe Tunnel through the Raton Mountains in New Mexico and further west through Arizona. He started a new store in Starkville and then moved to Salida, Colorado in 1878-79, being one of the first settlers there to found the town, after coal deposits were located there. He bought significant lots there in 1880 and he erected a store on First Street. He would make deliveries of supplies to Leadville in the mountains, where silver had been located, and where James, his brother, was employed as a miner. Sadly, Peter had been seriously ill for his last 5 years, having contracted typhoid fever. He owns considerable real estate on his death. He left a wife and 2 children, Rosalie, aged 10, and Tommy, aged 7. This must have hit John hard, having already lost Thomas 5 years earlier. Today, the city of Salida has a population of almost 6,000 people. Of personal interest, according to recent correspondence from Anne Webber, this goes on to something else. I won't cover that bit. Back in Brooklyn, New York, John Mulvaney appointed George A. Costello as his agent. Shortly thereafter, Mulvaney heard that Custer's last rally had been sold to Henry J. Hines of ketchup fame for $25,000, but he knew nothing about it. He reached out to Costello, but it was a mess. Hines were owed money on a failed property deal on Hines's building where the painting had been displayed. Hines seized the building and its contents. Mulvaney lost Custer's last stand. There was no $25,000. He was seen crying in the lobby of Hines' headquarters. Hines did commission him to make a duplicate of the painting and a portrait of Hines for $200. We don't know how much he received. There is debate today on the location of the original and the duplicate. Anne Webber reckons that the original is lost and that it's the duplicate that was on display at Hines until 1944 when it was sold. In 2020 it was further sold at auction in Texas. A value of $25 million had been placed on it, describing it as an invaluable collector's piece of American Western art and a true national treasure. $25 million. In 2023, the Booth Western Art Museum in Cartersville, Georgia, was gifted Custer's last rally by the Brad Briner family of North Carolina. This painting has now been lovely restored and is in pristine condition, just as John Mulvaney painted it. Mulvaney kept the Battle of Akron. After his death, Thomas Chute held it for the family, and it was exhibited in Denver in 1914. It was sold but disappeared later, only to show up for sale on eBay in 2010 as an American battle scene listed at $40,000. Irish art historian Eve O'Sullivan was searching for a different painting when she was shocked to suddenly find it on eBay. She tracked it down and it was bought by the Gorey Gallery in Dublin, later selling to an Irish private collector for over £240,000. Going back to Costello, he did help Mulvaney get a commission from Dr. Thomas Addis Emmett, grandnephew of Robert Emmett, to paint the definitive portrait of the Patriot. Prior to Dr. Emmett's death, the painting was passed back to Thomas Chute for safekeeping. He later donated it to the Irish nation in 1925. It is now located in the Irish Embassy in Rome. Somewhat nostalgically, here we see a painting named after his half-sister Ali, which he did in 1900. Alice Muldoon's horse. Despite all his apparent success, Mulvaney found himself at hard times and disappointed. He felt that Costello had cheated him out of the profits of the sale of Custer to Heinz. This was never resolved for him. Ali had to talk to him out of pawning the medal he was awarded by the Royal Academy of Fine Art in Munich years before. Mulvaney did paint the Boer Scouts around this time. In 1902, a local newspaper editor, George Rowe, discovered Mulvaney, reduced in circumstances and spirit, painting figures of angels in a loft for a local builder. Rowe tried to help him and asked him to paint a portrait of his son, if he was still able to do so. Mulvaney was very enthusiastic, and both were pleased with the painting. Rowe found him some more work, including a portrait of Mayor Dunn of Chicago, another prominent figure. However, the New York Times stated that he was too broken to do much, and he was willing to sell his paintings for almost nothing, including The Striker, a painting of a miner and his family. A painting of a miner and his family looking on in anger and despair at the collieries in full working condition while they were in abject poverty. In 1902, he exhibited a new work called The Anarchists. It featured 6 men cutting cards to determine who would commit a murder. Many thought the figures were recognisable as the members of Clan Gael Mulvaney believed had taken part in the murder of Dr. Cronin. Friends warned him that he was antagonising dangerous men, but he ignored them. The whereabouts of this painting are now unknown. Mulvaney's last recorded painting was a portrait of Bishop MacDonald of Brooklyn, New York in 1905, now also lost. By 1906, the 66-year-old Mulvaney had been diagnosed with throat cancer, a terminal condition in those days. He also suffered from vertigo, and he had fallen a number of times in his final months. He was evicted from his apartment in March 1906 for non-payment of rent, and may have been living on the street, although Anne Webber states that he was staying with his sister Ali. His health had seriously deteriorated. On May 23rd, 1906, Mulvaney's body was found floating in East River, New York. He had been missing for 3 weeks. Some speculated about the possibility of foul play after his angering Clan and Gael leaders, but 4 years had passed, making it somewhat unlikely. His autopsy report was destroyed by fire, so we'll never know. Did he fall from the ferry or was he pushed? The city newspapers reported that it was likely suicide. In his pockets was a small replica of his Custer painting and some newspaper clippings of glowing reviews, as well as a warm letter from Mayor Dunn of Chicago. However, there was a letter from an Indianapolis gallery saying that they would not exhibit his latest painting, The Striker, and also this poem. I'm lonesome tonight, Biddy Martin, and myself I don't know what to do. Sure, I go to the christening and whistling, were it not for me thinking of you. But I'll to New York, Biddy Martin, to me cousins beyond the deep sea, and when I'm there, Biddy Martin, I think you'll be thinking of me. Here we see the spot where his body was found. From a fine physique of a man, the New York Times obituary said, handsome features and a kindly countenance, he had sunk to a ragged derelict, uncertain of a night's lodging or a day's rest. Like so many famous Irish-born New Yorkers, Mulvaney was buried in Calvary Cemetery in Queens. I have to express all my thanks and recognition to Thomas P. Chute for his biography of John Mulvaney, published in the Gaelic American newspaper in 1909, capturing his life story. He was a true friend to John and also to Ireland. We owe immense gratitude to John Mulvaney's grandniece, Anne Weber, in America, who completed very significant research, much of which was used in this presentation. She spent 40 years in her work and located many of his paintings. Anne has been in touch many times and has been very supportive in sharing information most graciously. And this is her standing in front of the painting 40 years after she started out trying to discover his life story. Now, my sincere thanks to a Menominee native, or relative of John Mulvaney, who wishes to remain anonymous, for generously sharing a mountain of information with me, and including a very informative 2023 article by Joe Gannon. The Wild Geese online internet article, which first made me aware of John Mulvaney. Angela Lynch, Catherine McCormick for their practical help and encouragement. All the wider Mulvaney family for their consent and support. Anthony, Chairperson, Paul McCabe, Jimmy and Marie O'Brien, and all in the Community Council for proposing and hosting this presentation. This was an amazing journey for me, as each item researched added colour and detail to John Mulvaney's incredible life story. I am left in awe of this man's immense courage, talent and humanity. Last year, I received a call from Gabriel Mulvaney, who invited me to join him and his wife at their daughter Elaine's house in Kells, just before the Hinterland Festival presentation. There, they showed me an original John Mulvaney painting, Watching Birds in 1877, which they had just bought at White's Auctions in Dublin. I also saw a painting Elaine had done separately before they bought the painting, following arts class in Solstice Navan, incredibly titled Looking for Birds. Come, let's see what Elaine has to show us. Then I don't know, do you want to say a few words about it?
We just happened to we just happened to come across it online. Just had absolutely no idea. I was looking up a different artist and then was really shocked to see it on the website. That, you know, a relative's artwork was up for sale. So we just did what we could, and myself and my dad went up and we just tried our best to get it, and we got it. So we were delighted. And yes, just really lovely to have a piece of his art and to be able to bring it down here and share it with everyone to see.
So everybody, when we're finished here, everybody is very welcome to have a look. We also have Gabriel. Fergus. Fergus. I think Fergus might have some news for us as well. As we mentioned during the presentation, we have been talking about maybe, you know, doing some kind of commemoration for John Mulvaney in the parish, and with the support of the Community Council and hopefully Meath County Council, perhaps.
Forward to you.
Fergus can help us.
Hello. Yes, I got placed with this little job out of the blue. I just happened to be here last year by sheer accident. I just had a bit of time from home. This thing was happening, and that painting was just bought. So I was approached to perhaps make a kind of commemoration piece. So it's been a while since that time, and I've been busy on all sorts of the usual trail of sand sculpting I do when I go abroad. So I only just got started this summer, so had interesting challenges to create this thing where I'm staying abroad. It was basically kind of a kitchen sink production because I had nowhere else to do it in the heat and everything. So I got as much as I could done within the weight and constraints of bringing it back here. So now I'm working on trying to get the finishing stages, and then we'll talk about the placement and where it goes and how it ends up.
Very
So
good, Fergus.
I didn't bring it with me in my pocket.
So just to explain, Fergus is a sculptor.
Yeah.
So Fergus is going to create a bust, or is in the process of creating a bust of John Mulvaney, which will be put on display in the parish.
Very good.
So that's it, everybody. Hope you enjoyed the talk. You got a feel for the life and times of John Mulvaney. So if anybody has any questions.
When you're thinking of a question there, I'd like to thank you, Joe. I think you've done a magnificent job. I haven't heard this story before, and I think you delivered it extremely well. And it's a story worth telling. There's no doubt about it. Imagine a man from an North going over there and doing all those things. I couldn't help but being struck by the difference, I would say, in the life we heard last night of Harriet Barnes Mortimer in a similar time frame, where
Yes.
she travelled mainly between here and Mulla, although she extended, and the lifestyle that this man had. So two completely different lifestyles in or around the same
Time,
in or around the
same time.
So if you have any questions, I'd like to give and again, Joe, and I can thank you from the Community Council on behalf of us for doing it. I think it's great.
Yeah.
It's great.
Well, as I say, a little over a year ago, I had never heard of the man, and like it's, I should have known something exceptional would have come out of the Mulvaney family, given all the fantastic personages that the family has given us and the parish over the centuries.
Don't blow the head of them all together. Has anyone got a question? Right, hold on now.
Hope I can answer.
My name is Kieran Amachu. That was just brilliant. Once I saw the topic advertised in the Bee Chronicle, I just went straight for it, and it's been even better than I thought. It might be. But just in terms of, you mentioned he learned a lot of, or he could speak a lot of languages. I was just wondering.
Obviously he had a gift, because when he went to Germany, he obviously picked up German, and he spent time in France, and he went to Amsterdam, and apparently he just had the gift, and he was fluent in a number of languages, and that's been recorded content at the same time, as he was alive. So.
Very good, thank you.
Well, sure, all the Mulvaneys can speak plenty languages. Or was it Mark Twain that said, if you go to Berlin, you can learn to learn German, you can learn anything bar German.
There you go.
Anyone else?
Tony Smith here. Joe, is there any record of him coming back to Minority Derala?
Sorry?
Is there any record of John Mulvaney coming back to
No, he came
Derala?
back. He did come back, because even we have it there. He came back at least twice. I don't know if he came. Well, he came to Kells, and they wouldn't allow him to do the pictures of the churchyard. No, he did come back home, all right.
So he was home when, at the time, the mother died. Hold on now. Go ahead.
Catherine.
We feel that John Mulvaney possibly did return to Ireland, and especially around the time the mother died. He's certainly over in Europe around that time. It would make sense for him to turn up here around that time.
Great.
I think the mother died 1879, early 1880s. The stepfather, Owen O'Brien, died a few years later. I doubt he was around for that, but certainly the mother. He was here. On a different note, I'm sorry we missed your Millennium book. Anne Webber first made contact with Maynooth in the early 1980s. There was a letter, I think 1984, dated, that went to Bishop John McCormick, that eventually ended up in Bishop John McCormick's desk in Mulnagar. Anne wrote to Maynooth looking for information on a Bishop Mulvaney. There's a Maynooth record born in the 1940s, so then they diverted her on to Mulnagar parish, and that letter eventually was sent up to Bishop John McCormick, who took up the research then with his first cousins, Angela and Peter Duffy and Father Peter Mulvaney, and from there they made contact here in Minority with us. and that's how the research commenced. So
Brilliant, brilliant.
that's how far back we've known about her. Anne came home subsequently in the late 1980s and toured around, so she did the area, and she was home again in about 2011.
Like Anna be like in her 80s now, but she has offered, like
She's
if
very
there is
good
going to be if there is going to be a commemoration,
She does want
she
to
has
come.
offered to come, and that would be an incredible honour to have her here,
Mhm.
given all the work that she's put in.
Yes, she does want to see him honoured here in Minalty, so she does.
Yeah. Great. No pressure.
Anyone else? Well, if there's no other questions, thanks again, Joe. And don't
You're
forget,
very
we have another 2 outings on over the next 2 nights for this event. We have Step Into Tradition, Kaylee Dancing Bookshop tomorrow night, and we have Unlock Your Family History, a genealogy workshop, which our great Jimmy O'Brien on Friday night. So thanks again to you all for coming. Appreciate it. And look, check out again. It's only 1 week in the year. Great to see you here. Thank you very much.